I'll start by introducing myself. My name is Erin Romanchuk. I am the Director of Partnerships with the Energy Futures Lab, and I am the, host or moderator for today's session on carbon capture, utilization, and storage with EFL Fellow and CO2 businessman Jaeson Cardiff. I want to start on the next slide. You'll see that there's a map that we have gotten in the habit of showing. As soon as we get there, it shows the traditional sort of lands, there we go, of our country and even beyond. And if you go to the website that's listed there, it's really quite interesting. You can scroll across sort of the highlighted areas and see the traditional territories there. So there and around the world, actually, it's really cool. So I am privileged to be sitting in the city of Calgary, and I would like to just take a moment to acknowledge the land that I am on. And I invite you, if you know the land acknowledgement for wherever you are calling in from, to go ahead and give your own land acknowledgement as well. So I would like to acknowledge the traditional territories of the people of Treaty 7 region in southern Alberta, which includes the Blackfoot First Nation tribes, Siksika, the Piikani, the Kainai, the Stoney Nakoda First Nation tribes of Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Wesley, and the Tsuut'ina First Nation. The city of Calgary is also homeland to the historic Northwest Métis and to Métis Nation of Alberta Region 3. Thank you, Sonia. So on the next slide here, we are showing that this is a series that we've titled, that the EFL has titled, Big Ideas for Our Energy Future. And we've had several already. This is about sort of the middle of what we have planned, and you can see listed there what we have forthcoming. So as you may or may not know, the Energy Futures Lab is a coalition of innovators and leading organizations who work together to create the energy system that is fit for the future. The EFL started in 2015 as a response to the polarized nature of the conversation on energy and energy transition. And it now has grown to support over 70 fellows from across the energy system to come together to work together to take action on projects that advance solutions for Canada's energy future. So the Big Ideas series gives a flavor of a few of the solutions that are coming out of the EFL. And it really was inspired by an article two of my colleagues had co-wrote in March, Alison Cretney and Chad Park. And you may have read it, some of you, and if not, I think it's still accessible. It's called The 5 Big Ideas for Alberta's Economic Recovery. And the idea is, there is no magic to the number 5, but it's catchy. So the 5 that they sort of highlighted initially were hydrogen, geothermal, bitumen beyond combustion, artificial intelligence and machine learning, as well as lithium. And so the article was so well received, and we hosted a few sessions featuring the fellows with expertise in those fields, that we decided to carry on that sort of approach to having conversations on these big ideas, and therefore the Big Ideas series was born out of that. We are hoping that this could be as interactive as possible. We will be using Slido. I will share, you could see the code on the screen as CCUS for those of you who are familiar with Slido, but we'll do a tech check in a few moments. But really the intention is discussing these new ideas as a community and encouraging the cross-pollination amongst stakeholders will result in really a collaborative co-creation type approach to creating the energy system the future requires of us while fueling economic recovery in Alberta. So there's also the chat box option in Zoom to just say hi to one another or react to what you're hearing. I will note that the questions will be taken via Slido and not the Zoom chat box. So on today's topic, I wanted to share just sort of how we got here, why the Energy Futures Lab is interested in this topic of carbon capture, utilization, and storage, which I'll probably start referring to as CCUS for short. As may not come as much of a surprise, the Energy Futures Lab has found that there's usually widely different views about the role of fossil fuels in our future economy. We have found common ground in the concept that we refer to as future fit hydrocarbons. So this is not a yes or a no response to hydrocarbons, but a way that we can explore how to use the materials in the future and how they can be be a continued source of prosperity in a low carbon emission future. So out of sort of that theme and larger sort of bucket in the Energy Futures Lab comes carbon utilization and carbon capture and storage. And so that's why we're hosting a conversation with our expert, Jaeson, on this talk today. So on the next slide, please, Sonia. Most importantly, before we get rolling through the content, I want to take a moment to thank Calgary Economic Development. They are sponsoring this session along with the upcoming one in September with Marla Ornstein, and they've sponsored a previous session as well. So really huge shout out to them for their support. And I'm just going to give an EFL fellow and CED's own Megan Zimmerman just a minute or two to share why this is important, this conversation is important, and why CED is sponsoring us. So Megan, if you're there, over to you.
I'm here. You can hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. That's usually not a problem with my voice. Thanks, Erin. I am a very proud Energy Futures Lab fellow, as we call us, the OG. I joined 5 years ago, and it's just getting better. So really happy to bring my organization along and be part of this session and others, as you mentioned. Just a couple brief remarks from me to kind of tie Calgary Economic Development's work to the importance of these conversations around big ideas for our energy future. Calgary Economic Development is the steward of Calgary in the new economy, words that I'm sure you're hearing a lot of us talk about as of late. Calgary in the new economy is the roadmap for Calgary's strategic growth that focuses on building a diverse, innovative, and prosperous city. This strategy, Calgary in the new economy, has 4 pillars and 4 priority areas that really encapsulate the work that we're focused on. Those include talent, innovation, which certainly we're going to talk about today with Jaeson, place, and business friendly. And for those of you that are interested, I certainly would love to have further conversations about what's part of those pillars. The vision for Calgary in the new economy is to make Calgary the city of choice for the world's best entrepreneurs. We embrace technology to solve the world's greatest challenges, including cleaner energy. The strategy is clear. We must build on our strengths. And when it comes to energy, we all know in Alberta and Canada that we have a lot to build from. So the work being led by Jaeson and the team at Cleano2 is a perfect example of technologies being built in Calgary to solve one of the world's biggest problems. And Cleano2's technology demonstrates that with the right people and the right technology, we can turn those challenges into opportunities, and in this case, value-added consumer products. So it's my pleasure for Calgary Economic Development to sponsor the Big Ideas for Our Energy Future series. We certainly are strong believers that Calgary and Alberta have all of the necessary ingredients to be a global clean tech leader, leveraging our decades of experience, the quality of our talent, the abundance of natural resources, and our desire to provide the world with the safest, most environmentally responsible, and diverse energy solutions for many years to come. So that's a perfect segue for Jaeson's conversation today. So thank you, Erin. Back to you.
All right. Thank you, Megan. Okay, so right before I introduce Jaeson formally, we were going to do a quick tech check. So on the next slide, there's some instructions, basically 2 steps. Go to slido.com, enter the code CCUS, and you can see a tab, depending on if you're on your phone, on your computer, on an iPad, a tab for Q&A and a tab for the polls. There will be both being used throughout the next 50 minutes. And the test is going to be the next question, or the next slide shows the question, how we're going to test your use of the Slido poll. So the question is, if you could have any superpower, what would it be? And so on Slido, you should be able to type in perfect, an answer just like that. Invisibility, speed. Actually, Jaeson, I'm going to put you on the spot while we see some other superpowers roll in. What would yours be?
Mine was time travel.
Well, that was you.
That was me. Yeah, I would love to be able to go back in time and witness things from the Ice Age to the Roman Empire to any number of historical events that we can only read about. So awesome. that'd be my thing.
Very good. I love the absorbing the existing CO2 in the atmosphere. That's a superpower.
Nice.
Very related to the topic. So good work there. Okay, I think most people have a hang of Slido, and we have a few polling questions at the end of Jason's presentation. And as I mentioned before, I'll mention one more time. Any questions that emerge and you want to pose to Jason, please use the Q&A tab in Slido, and we'll be monitoring those. And we like using this approach because you can also vote for questions that you want to have sort of surface to the top of the question list. So yeah, be populating those as we hear Jason's presentation, and then I'll refer to them after. Okay, so positivity. Okay, I think we'll go to the next slide, and I can introduce our speaker, Jaeson Cardiff. So Jason has spent the last 20 years working in the commercial heating industry. In 2005, it became clear to him that the industry needed to find ways to reduce the output of carbon from heating appliances, and set about developing technology with his colleagues that could both reduce emissions through direct capture and through heat recovery. His team continues to add value to the heating industry by showcasing the value and usefulness of carbon dioxide. In 2017, Jason helped launch the world's first commercialized microscale carbon capture system, and is expanding the technology across Canada and the United States. A little about Clean O2. The mission, as far as I understand it, or the inspiration, was to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in the heating industry. The team deems success was possible to do this by three measures. First, it needed to create a net benefit to the customer. Second, it would need to be economically self-sufficient and not require government subsidies or tax incentives. Third, the degree of CO2 reduction needed to be meaningful at scale. So Carbon X was born out of this, the world's first profitable microscale carbon capture technology. I'm going to leave it to Jason to share more about the company and the process, and he will, as I mentioned, be ready for your questions afterward. So on the next slide, I think, is the beginning of some of Jason's slides, and with that, over to you, Jason.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for the intro. Spot on. Let's maybe move over to the next slide, please. So we started off in 2005. I was working for a company in Calgary called XLR Mechanical, and I spent a lot of time in commercial heating facilities, or in mechanical rooms rather. And at the time, there was a lot of news articles that were coming out regarding carbon emissions. And what was interesting about all of these articles is that they were really focused in on the large emitters, and they seemed to be focused on transportation industry. You know, Tesla was starting to get its feet under us in terms of becoming a successful enterprise, and there were people like Dr. David Keith from the University of Calgary at the time, who was working on an ambient air scrubber, which later evolved into a carbon engineering in Squamish. So there's a lot of really cool projects that were going on, but I noticed that there was a real significant gap in that conversation, in that 25% of the emissions that are generated in this country come from being comfortable during the winter and having hot water and all the appliances that use natural gas to bring us that comfort. There was no real sort of effort being focused on reducing the carbon emissions. Now, other than looking at ways to maximize the energy that was being used, the efficiency that was needed to get the most amount of heat out of using natural gas for heat, so your hot water tanks and your boilers. So I approached some manufacturers, and that's pretty much all they had. They just said, well, we're just gonna go from 80% to 99%, and that's great. That's really important. But it doesn't really address the carbon emissions, because you're 100% efficient, but you're still using natural gas. You're still producing CO2. So what's the solution? So that's where we decided, well, let's try to do something. Let's see if we can solve the problem. Next slide, please. So as Aaron said, we took a hard look at saying, okay, well, look, if we're going to create a solution for this, what are the key barriers that we have to run up against? And we had paid some attention to the Ontario wind industry, where it was heavily subsidized by the government. And the moment those subsidies went away, the industry really sort of hit a pretty big pothole. And a lot of those businesses kind of went under because they relied so heavily on the government subsidies. So we thought, okay, well, there's a big pothole. We want to avoid that. So how do we reduce carbon emissions that doesn't involve government incentive and adds value to our customers? So that's where we sort of said, okay, well, look, carbon can be used as a feedstock for something. So we brought in a hydroxide, and we thought, okay, well, let's expose it to a hydroxide. We'll turn it into a chemical, and then we'll sell the chemical. And then the idea was we were just going to flip the chemical to industry. It was just going to be an arbitrage play of commodities where we buy a cheap chemical, we turn it into an expensive chemical, and we ship it out the door. Easy breezy. But what we found, though, was that that didn't work. we had problems getting the potash that we were producing out to market. Actually, originally we were producing sodium carbonate, soda ash. But soda ash was cheap. I mean, you could buy it, for $600-700 per metric ton, and we needed to sell it for like $1,600 to $1,700 per metric ton in order to make it work. So that went against one of our other mechanisms of the economics had to work, right? You have to make it economically feasible in order for the technology to be sustainable, and I think that's true across the board in any clean tech. So we moved into potash. We got a bit of a swing in the commodity, and then we thought, okay, well, we're not able to sell the potash. What do we do? Well, it's used in soap. Well, soap's not that hard to make. Now, there's a difference between making soap and making good soap. The soap that we were originally producing was not good soap, and I'm embarrassed to say that we actually gave it to some customers, some very influential customers, and it was not a good quality soap. But so we quickly enrolled the help of some very talented local Calgary artisans, namely Jill Hawker, who runs the apothecary in Inglewood, and she stepped in and helped us out by producing these amazing body bars that we could incorporate our potash into. And that was kind of the solution. And from there, we worked with another Alberta-based organization in Edmonton called Ostrom Chemical to produce our commercial products. And we just sort of swung into this industry of becoming a soap company. So we can reduce carbon emissions, we can create a great product through soap and detergency, and the industry is massive. And we can also increase energy efficiencies, and so there's a lot of mechanisms to our business model that we can add to our customer that overcome all of the potholes that clean tech typically comes up against. Next slide, please. So we currently have 24 units that have been sold. 7 units were in operation. COVID has impacted the operation of the units in BC. We're just starting to bring them back online. In the past, we've traveled to BC to actually maintain them and work with the mechanical contractors to set things up. It was always intended to be a remote operation for us, so we've had to sort of fast track our remote operations of our technology. So that's proving a little bit challenging for us, but we're working around that. We also have units being delivered down to Minneapolis. So we get 1 unit sitting at a major hotel chain in Minneapolis at the Mall of America. So that's all coming back into gear. So we're producing these soaps. We've shipped soaps all over North America and beyond into the European market. So we're doing really well. And of course, the remarkable thing about this is we just accidentally pivoted into the soap and detergent industry. And how relevant is that given today's pandemic of personal hygiene and washing your hands, that we just happen to have just by pure luck of happen to be in a very relevant market of soaps and detergents. Next slide, please. So really the 3 things that we're providing of value to our customers is carbon capture. We also recover some of the waste heat from these appliances and plug that back into the building, so that reduces the amount of gas that you're having to use. So there's actually a carbon offset as well as a direct carbon capture. And then our real sort of push and the method behind the adoption is the profit sharing piece, which we'll get into in a moment. But we actually profit share with our customers from the sale of these pieces of equipment that we put in your mechanical room. So these are all CSA UL listed. There's some regulatory concerns that we're getting over. We're trying to work as close as we can with Alberta Municipal Affairs with City Manning, as well as with Technical Safety BC in British Columbia, and some code officials in the US to overcome. As you can imagine, you know, the Canadian Gas Venting Code, B149, makes no mention of microscale carbon capture. Who would have thought, right? So we're trying to adopt the spirit of the gas code to make sure that we're operating safely. Next slide, please. So this sort of breaks down how the equipment works. So we don't interrupt 100% of the flue gas, and that's a safety factor. We want to make sure that if our equipment fails for any reason, that the appliance we're attached to can carry on. So we're not getting a very angry call at 3 o'clock in the morning saying, hey, I don't have any heat, or I don't have any hot water. So if our system fails now, we'll have we have an IoT platform built in the unit, dials home, lets us know that something's going on, and the heating system that we're attached to just carries on as normal. So we divert a portion of the flue gas into our equipment. That carbon component then is absorbed by the hydroxides in the reaction chamber. That's exothermic, so it gets hot when it's exposed to CO2. So we add the waste heat from the appliance with the exothermic heat of the chemistry. We scrub out the carbon, and then we put the remaining flue gas back into the stack that we pulled it out of. And then we pre-warm the water coming into the building. So this works really well in rec centers, laundry facilities, and like condos. So you're getting municipal water temperatures coming into the building at like 7 to 10 degrees Celsius. So we'll pre-warm that water before it goes into the hot water tank with that waste heat that we've captured to, once again, lower the amount of gas that's needed to meet the energy demands of the building. Next slide, please. So this is sort of a scale of where we want to go, like, and it kind of comes back to the comments that Aaron made about, you know, having a meaningful impact on the amount of carbon emissions. So if we only ever installed 5 or 6 or even 27 units, the amount of impact that Cleaner 2 is going to have is going to be next to nothing, right? We're talking about a major issue. So this is like planting a tree in the forest, right? You plant one tree and it does, you know, it does so much good. But when you plant an entire forest, then you have a significant impact. And there's a lot of mechanical rooms out there. So we've been able to hit, currently we're sitting at around a 20% reduction in GHG intensities. And we've had that independently reviewed from the University of British Columbia and another energy auditor. But our goal is to get to 100%. It isn't, we're not stopping at 20, we're not stopping at 50, we're aiming for 100, and we have a roadmap to get there. So that's important to us. Once again, we're talking about 25% of the emissions in this country, just coming from this industry. So it's a largely untapped issue that we're trying to resolve. It's 12% in the US, in case anybody's interested. You know, 12% of anything in the United States it's pretty massive. Far outranks anything in Canada. So that's something else that we're also focusing on. The North America market is quite massive. Just as a quick fact check, the United States is the largest consumer of natural gas products in the world. They consume a tremendous amount of natural gas. So it's an excellent opportunity for us to showcase our technology by reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Next slide, please. So the economics that we work with the customer is that we sell the equipment to our customers and then we pay them back. It's essentially a loan, you know, in essence, where you buy the equipment from us and we pay you back in less than 5 years. And we do that by producing 3 to 4 metric tons of potash in the units per year, selling this as soaps and detergents, and then profit sharing with the customers. And then even after the ROI is met with our customers, we're still paying them afterwards. So it's an ongoing revenue stream. The analogy that we use for these mechanical rooms is essentially we're turning your mechanical room into a mining operation where you buy the equipment and we operate it for you and pay you for whatever we can pull out of the flue gas. Next slide, please. Well, one of the things we really try to focus on is keeping that circular economy tight. It doesn't make any sense if we're producing potash in New York, shipping it to Calgary to turn it into soap, and then shipping that soap to Los Angeles to sell on the market. The amount of carbon we've generated in that space is obviously far greater than the amount we've actually captured from each location. So one of the examples is this hotel chain in Minneapolis where they use obviously a tremendous amount of soap. So we capture the CO2, convert it into a chemical. That chemical is shipped probably 20, 30 minutes away from the hotel into a facility that produces soaps. The soaps are then brought back to the hotel to use on site. So you've got this really tight economy. So there's lots of examples where we can do that, whether it's a rec center, hotel chain, or any other industry that uses a large amount of soap products. Next slide, please. So we started off, the very first units went in Calgary with the ATCO Whitehorn facility, the Garrison Woods facility down in southwest part of the city. And then we got an order from ATCO Gas to put one up in the northeast part of the city at their Whitehorn natural gas station. Then we went into a project for 10 units to be installed with FortisBC in Vancouver and Victoria. And then most recently was a deal for 10 units that have been sold to Centerpoint Energy in Minneapolis. We have ongoing conversations with Pacific North Gas for a project in Dawson Creek, National Grid in New York, and of course here at home, or in Ontario rather, with Enbridge, something going in and around Toronto. So we're hoping to have that out later this year or early 2021. Just as a interesting fact, the picture on the right, the Lush Cosmetics, that was an interesting install because it wasn't attached to a combustion source. There was no combustion, but for anybody who uses Lush products, those little bath bombs, my kids love them. You put it in the water and it gets all fizzy. So they produce obviously a large volume of these, and when they're curing them, they produce a large amount of CO2. So we're actually able to divert that CO2 into our unit, using it and converting it into a chemical that Lush can then use to produce products. So once again, it's all about circular economy. We want to keep everything nice and close so we can maximize the amount of carbon that we're offsetting. Next slide, please. So huge market potential for us, and this is really a core part of the fact that we're a Calgary-based enterprise addressing a global issue. We're very proud to be Calgary-based, very proud to be Alberta-based and Canadian. It's a great story that we're exporting all around the world. We've got conversations going on with Tokyo Gas in Japan, our friends in Ireland, and as well as in Norway and Germany. That there's a lot of interest abroad that we're sort of exporting this story and this technology and our capacity to have a meaningful impact on carbon by converting it into usable products. So it's a great opportunity to showcase a Canadian enterprise. Next slide, please. So these are some of the products that we produce. See on our website. These are brand new images. We hired a photographer. So in past, I was the photographer, and just much like with soap producing, I am not a photographer. So we hired a local talent who did a great job in providing us with some quality images for our slides and for our material. You can buy our products online, and we are starting to put them into retail chains. I think our first retail opportunity is the IGA and Sundry, and then hopefully we can get folks like Canadian Tire and London Drugs on board with us, so that we can get our products on their shelf as well. Next slide, please. Here's the team. This is, and we've added to this team since this slide was taken. We now have somebody working with us directly who can handle soap and detergent production in-house. And we also have a sales and marketing fellow, Brent McDermott, who's going to be helping us spread the gospel of Clean O2. We have a field technician, Calvin Jones, who's coming on board with us next week. And it's all about the people. When you're starting a business, you really have to surround yourself with solid people who recognize your vision and want to move it in the same direction. And I consider myself incredibly lucky to have been able to find such amazing talent and have wanted to help me, because you can't get there by yourself. So you really need to associate yourself with solid people. Next slide. I think that's it. Yeah, there's my presentation. That's it. How much time was that? Was that about 15 minutes?
That was almost exactly 15 minutes. I am very impressed.
Nailed it.
Well done.
I practiced.
I can tell. That was great. Thank you so much. I'm just going to remind everybody on the line, we are monitoring the questions at slido.com with the code CCUS. And if Slido is just not your jam, we can probably also read the chat box. So if you want to pop a question in there, that's okay as well. But while those are filtering in, I'm going to take the liberty of starting with one. So the Energy Futures Lab is a social innovation lab, Jason, as you know, and we are interested in what, the technology seems to work. Like, I'm convinced of that. Your technology works well. It's a great idea and you've proven it out. I'm wondering if you can identify any sort of the social type barrier. So just anything non-technical that you, either looking back or currently have. You did reference right now, there's some regulatory barriers you're working to overcome, but are there any other barriers that if you think were not currently there, it would just sort of open up this opportunity for a lot of other, innovators and entrepreneurs? And I'm just wondering what those might be.
For CCUS, I've noticed that our biggest pivot and we gained the most amount of traction when we went into the soap and detergent industry pre-COVID, like even before we were talking about, personal hygiene being at an all-time important high. Yeah. It was creating a product that was tangible that people understood. Biofuels are important. Concrete, cement, obviously very important because it's a huge emitter of CO2. That industry is a massive contributor to GHGs, but it's all on how you engage the public, and that's, I think, one issue that the CCUS community as a whole struggles with. We still struggle with it to some degree. Is how do you engage everybody with the topic of utilizing carbon emissions? We've been fortunate that we've tapped into something that people seem to really get and understand. But I still think that there's more work to be done there. So it's just about its engagement and making it an easy sort of step to get people to understand, oh, okay, CCUS, okay, I can apply it to something that I'm already doing.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you. I think that sort of ties in nicely to the currently top voted question there. And I don't know if you're watching the questions as well, but I'm happy to read them to you. I think this is a question that lots of people have in reaction to your product, Jason. So I'm happy to ask it on behalf of this participant. So what happens to the product after it's used? Does the soap or detergent go back into the environment as CO2?
Yeah, we get asked that a lot, and the answer is no. You actually have to work really hard to get that CO2 out of its current format. When you expose CO2 to a hydroxide, it binds with that, and it won't let it go. You have to force it out of that. So just by washing your hands and using it as you would typically use soaps and detergents, it doesn't release the CO2. It stays as a carbonate. So it's non-toxic. It doesn't bioaccumulate. It's something that's readily found in nature. Carbonates are a common mineral that you can go down to a riverbed and you see the white crust that builds up on the rocks around the edge of the water. That's a carbonate product. So it doesn't get released. So in order to release it, you would have to, burn your soap, or you would have to acidize your soap. And if you're doing either of those things to your soap, you've either got too much time on your hands or you've got bigger issues at play.
Right. Okay. Thank you for clearing that up. Actually, somebody asked me that when they saw your soap in my house, and I was like, I'm sure it doesn't go back into the answer, but I don't quite understand the chemistry. So thank you for that explanation.
Another analogy you could compare it to would be like, think of the ocean water. The ocean water is full of sodium chloride, right? So when the ocean water evaporates, you don't have chlorine gas evaporating into the atmosphere, right? It comes out as salt, right? So yes. It's the same process with our soap.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we'll move to this next top voted question. Could a household level unit be built economically that would allow me to incorporate it into my heating boiler and house water supply and produce my own soap? There's ambitious.
Yeah, that's a great question. We actually have experimented with a residential scale model. We did build one. There's actually one here at the shop. Actually, the very first unit we built was a residential scale model. Funny enough, when we were experimenting with the residential scale model early on, I didn't talk to my partner, who's a chemist, or what the reaction would be of exposing hydroxide, sodium hydroxide to aluminum. Apparently it produces hydrogen gas, which is quite flammable when exposed to an open flame source like a, I don't know, furnace. So I almost blew up my house with an early scale prototype with the residential model. But there's some issues with the residential unit, not from a technology standpoint, but from a logistics of collection. We can figure out how to capture the carbon and convert it into a product. We can figure out how to get it from the curb to a distribution center. It's that gap between your house and the curb that we haven't quite figured out. Like, is the customer going to be engaged enough to be able to take a cartridge out of their unit and bring it to the curb so that somebody can come and collect it? And I don't know that it's not, because I mean, you know, if you were to put a poll here today of how many people have changed out their furnace filter in the last 6 months, I'm guessing probably there's a lot of people on the call here today who haven't. And you should change out. It keeps the appliance running efficiently, but not everybody does that. So now you're asking them to take a cartridge of carbonates to the curb for collection and recharge. So it's a bit clunky. It works really well in the commercial space because technicians already go to those rooms. So we're just paying them an extra 2 hours of their time to do a PM check and a collection process. So, but I still think there's a play there in the residential market. We are working on it.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. This one is an interesting question, this next one, and it might, you know, take us to sort of a different, I guess, framing of CCUS if we start talking about how oil and gas, you know, companies could be using it. So feel free to answer in whatever way you feel most comfortable or take a pass. But the question is, what is a realistic ROI for CCUS? And with that, given that traditional oil and gas seeks ROIs in excess of 20%, but do not take into account full life cycle operational practices. So I'm not sure if is that clear? Okay.
Yeah. I understand the question. It's difficult for me to give you a clear answer, though, just because it's a complicated question. Yeah. You know, you remember we're dealing with this at a very small scale, incredibly small scale. It could be scaled up to larger application, and that return on the investment would likely be the same. Let's say, for example, instead of producing soaps and detergents, we were able to go into the agricultural industry. So companies like Nutrien use thousands of metric tons of potassium carbonate on a weekly, monthly basis. So if you had a larger scale application, you could turn it into a larger mining operation and have a relatively short ROI for that one application. I'm not sure that it would scale properly, though, if taken to larger numbers. Just because we haven't really spent much time looking at that space, just because it's not our demographic of customers. It's not the market that we're tapping into. But that doesn't mean we won't get there. So I don't know if I can give a clear answer to that question.
Yeah.
Other than I think CCUS has to have a short ROI, regardless of scale, in order for it to be adopted. It has to. It won't fly if we're talking a 20, 30, 40-year ROI for a CCUS project. I mean, that's not feasible, in my opinion.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. And sort of on the theme of scaling, and maybe you've answered it, but the next question is specifically asking about if you could scale large enough to capture from a natural gas power plant and produce millions of tons of potash. And is that another sort of to be determined as we, you know, do the data collection and analysis, or do you know?
Yeah, I think there's an opportunity there. I really do. For us, it's resource management. We know the heating industry intimately. I spent 20 years in this industry, so that's kind of where we're focused on. We do get asked on a regular basis to scale up our technology to meet larger emitter sources. The other thing we need to bear in mind too is that, you know, from a business perspective, we're kind of the only fish in the pond. I mean, there's a couple other smaller companies in the U.S. that are doing this, but not they're not really commercialized, whereas we're commercialized and ready to go. There are lots of players in the larger markets, and they're doing a heck of a good job. And that's, that's one of the things I love about the CCUS industry is that, companies like Carbon Upcycling Technology, Carbon Engineering, Sponte, there's a ton of hypergiant in the US. They're all doing great work. And there's not a sort of a competitive nature to it, but they're all focusing on the large emitters. So there's a lot of competitors in that space. So I think there's probably a better fit for larger scale applications than our technology, but that doesn't mean we won't try something later on down the road.
Okay, thank you. And sort of with that in the Zoom chat, Vladimir looks like he was wondering how many tons of CO2 are captured per year per unit?
With the offset, it works out between 8 to 10 metric tons per unit per year.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks for the question, Vladimir. Okay, I think we have time for maybe 2 more questions. Okay, so probably a quick yes or no one. Does Clean02's office use a Carbon-X unit in the building's mechanical room?
We actually have a unit in the back here that we're getting attached to one of our unit heaters in the back, so we can capture CO2 at this location. So the answer is yes.
Okay, great. Let's see. I think you answered competitive. Is there a fuel or a feedstock outside of flue gas required to make the grade perl ash?
The pearl ash, yeah. So that's part of our life cycle analysis. Really quick sort of overview of the industry. So currently, if you want to buy potassium carbonate, the traditional channels are they would take, say, the potassium chloride from the mines in Saskatchewan. They'd put it into a slurry. Right? They'd run it through an electrolytic process where they're going to get rid of the hydrogen gas and get rid of the chlorine gas. They sell them as commodities if they burn them or whatever they do with them. And then they're left with KOH or potassium hydroxide. That potassium hydroxide in liquid form is then shipped to companies in the US. So the biggest, I think the folks with the largest market share is Armin Products. People are probably familiar with Armin Hammer, baking soda. So they're a big producer of carbonate products. So they take this aqueous, this liquid potassium hydroxide, and they take natural gas and they burn it, and then they take that CO2 component and aerate the CO2 through the aqueous potassium hydroxide to produce potassium carbonate. So what we're doing is essentially the same thing. The difference being is that you've already paid for the gas to heat your home, and now we're taking this stuff that you're venting to atmosphere and running it through potassium hydroxide to create the same product. Now, granted, on a much smaller scale, but it's far more energy efficient to do it through our equipment because you're getting 2 passes out of the same molecule versus a sole purpose of just burning natural gas to produce carbonate. So it has a smaller energy intensity than traditional channels.
Okay, I think most people probably followed that, and then there's the rest of us who are like, sounds complicated, but
sorry.
Impressive. No, it's very good. Okay, last question, because there's a few that are really interesting, but this one I think might be maybe most relevant to sort of EFL and opening up the solution space. I'm curious, and so is Gary, it looks like, what was the largest challenge or challenges you overcame from going from concept to commercialization?
Ooh, wow, that's a loaded question. There's so many. Adoption. I mean, and it sounds silly, but I used to work as a plumber, and getting people on board, finding the right people to get on board with me to take this to market was probably the biggest challenge, because when I show up at a lot of these conferences and there's a lot of faculty and engineers and really smart people who've done remarkably well for themselves, but here comes a plumber and a gas fitter, saying he wants to address issues associated with carbon capture. I mean, it's pretty hard to be taken seriously, which I understand to a degree. But I think personally, that was the biggest challenge to get some traction. Was we have this sound idea. It has some worth and some merit. We just need to get some people who believe in us to try.
Right. Okay. Thank you so much, Jason. That was great. I want to move into a couple of the poll questions that we have pre-populated. So Sonia, if you want to move to the next slide, it'll show what those poll questions are. So these polls will show up on Slido. So there's going to be three, but the first two are around desirability. So how desirable is carbon capture, utilization, and storage for Alberta's energy future? And then we'll follow that up with sort of the why or why not. So Sonia, if you go to the next slide, it should launch that poll. How desirable is carbon capture, utilization, storage for Alberta's energy future? Yeah, I kind of think one line we could have added is it depends, because I think it probably does depend on a few factors and, you know, how it's approached, but the cost, who pays, those types of things. Somewhat desirable. Yeah, this is pretty heavily weighted towards the very desirable for Alberta's energy future. I might even say, you know, a necessary part of the transition to get to our goals for 2050. So 23 people. Okay, I think we could move to the next one, because I am curious to see sort of why or why not CCUS a desirable pathway. I can see a couple comments in the chat box. I would love to hear why not, I guess, if there were any of the why nots on that final question. Also, Brock is sharing, thinking about how to approach this. Blue hydrogen, getting the technology on power plants, feeding our greenhouses, being able to grow Alberta oranges. I agree, that's like a systems approach. How can we use it and use it in between systems to create what we need, energy, food. As for why is or isn't CCUS a desirable pathway towards our energy future? Market diversification, usable resource, the enabling of blue hydrogen business is a clear indicator. Let's see here. A bit of a worry. Okay, here's a why not. Worry that it falls into the problematic technology will save us narrative, the sense we can continue business as usual, and CCUS will clean it up. Any comments on that one, Jason?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I'm a tech head. I love technology. I believe in it, so I understand this the question, the worry. You know, our energy future is going to become very multifaceted. It's not just CCUS. It's, you know, take the heating industry for example. Personally, I think the future of the heating industry is hydrogen. Using electricity to meet the energy demands for northern communities is a misuse of energy, in my opinion. I think you can get more bang for your buck using either blue or green hydrogen to meet energy demands for heating purposes, which then eliminates the need for carbon capture in this industry. But that's maybe 20, 30 years down the road, and we need to start acting on CCUS today, not 20 years from now. So I understand the worry, and I agree. We do tend to get this wide swath answer of technology will just solve everything, because it will. It's just,
right.
But it's not a single answer. It's not one solution. It's multiple solutions.
Thank you. I would tend to agree. As I'm learning more and more about it, it does appear that it is something we could do right now to sort of start the transition, not really sort of the end of like, once we do it, okay, we've solved climate change or emission challenges. So I hear the narrative though around, oh, it just sort of enables the oil and gas And you know what, it in my mind, I'm seeing it more and more as a part of the transition. And as you say, it's just a piece of the overall puzzle. So yeah, lots of great comments, and we are able to save all of them. So we will have them and be able to sort of review and even share back. So thank you for all of those. Let's go our last poll question, I think. Yes, the next one and final poll question here. We're curious, do you see either natural gas or hydrogen as a primary energy source? Both, neither, hydrogen, natural gas as the primary energy source. I mean, yeah, both, majority. If you have no idea, yeah, I hear you, Mark. Jason, what is your response? Or maybe you've locked in your vote here.
Yeah, I have to go with both initially. There's a lot of, and for those that are really deeply involved in the electrification of our energy infrastructure, I don't say this with malice or disrespect, but it almost feels like a cult mentality of we're just going to electrify everything. And it's just not, in my industry, the heating industry, that's just not a good avenue to take. It's, if you know the industry like I know, you can't navigate to that in a reasonable time frame, in an economical time frame set point. It just doesn't work. So natural gas is going to maintain its position. If you look at even the most conservative forecast of natural gas use over the next few decades, natural gas plays a significant role in that. I think you look at ATCO Gas is doing a great job. They're starting to roll in and doing these hydrogen blends with their gas. And I can see that will eventually, that blend will get greater as the industry catches up. Eventually it will end up as a hydrogen-based industry, not natural gas. But we're talking long term here, decades.
Mm-hmm.
So I think both initially, but eventually hydrogen.
Okay, thank you for that. I mean, I was going to say I wanted to give you the final opportunity to make a comment, but maybe those were good closing comments. Jason, if there's nothing else to add, I will ask Sonia to go to the next slide and just share my thank you to you, Jason, and share what the next session of Our Energy Future series is going to be featuring. And there it is. It's going to be hosted by my colleague Julie Roll with guest presenter Marla Orenstein. So Marla is the director of Natural Resources Center at the Canada West Foundation. So they're going to be discussing opportunities for Alberta's inactive wells. And next slide, Sonia. We invite everybody, thank you for joining us today, and I invite you to follow us on social media to keep up to date on future events from the Energy Futures Lab and opportunities for engagement. Thank you for using Slido and the chat box. It was great to see some interactivity, and huge thanks one more time to Calgary Economic Development for sponsorship, and to Jaeson Cardiff for your time and your expertise. I very much appreciate it. So with that, I wish you a really great afternoon. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you very much.